Okay, so let's get started here. So I'm going to be designing today a setting reference document for the game Chris Perrin's Mecha. This is a fairly obscure mecha RPG, but I think it has a lot going for it. And recently, I guess there has been the Blades in the Dark hack Beam Saber that's been in development, and that's interesting to me. But I've kind of sworn off running unfinished Blades in the Dark hacks because, as some of you may have seen with when I ran Karma in the Dark, for a game as complex as Blades hack, having an unfinished book with rough layout makes it really hard to run the game. So I'm looking at some alternatives. I'm probably going to be running Chris Perrin's Mecha, and I'm also going to be running the beta of Lancer, which is a new game that is in development by the creators of Shadow of the Demon Lord, which is more of sort of like a trad game take on mecha play, which nevertheless incorporates a lot of sort of indie dynamics as well. So I'm pretty interested in both of these options, and I'm also going to be looking at maybe designing a World of Dungeons hack that does mecha stuff. So these are kind of ideas I have at the back of my head, and of course I have that Blades of the Dark hack at the back of my head too, but that's going to be very sort of strange and unusual, not something conventional. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about what a setting reference document is. So it says, every player is going to create a character who is the player's alter ego in the world. While the players may not own a mecha or pilot it in combat, they can still experience doing that through the eyes of their characters. Yeah, of course. I mean, I know I don't own a mecha. However, before creating that character and playing the game, everyone should have a pretty good idea of what the world looks like, the nature of the mecha that can be piloted, the factions who vie for power, and the government and major religions of the world. In some cases, these details may be superfluous, but in some cases, they'll make a major difference. In mecha, that's the name of the game, we refer to all of this information as the setting of the game. Mecha packages all this information into a Setting Reference Schematic, or SRS. This document is the master reference for all things related to the setting. The core Mecha rulebook has 3 SRSs in the back of the book, each portraying a totally separate set of setting details. However, you may wish to create your own setting. That's awesome. Do it, and feel free to drop us an email about the setting you create. To create your own setting, this book presents a series of questions which flesh out the world and its inhabitants. Some of these questions will be fairly simple to answer. What is the time period of the game? Others will be tougher. What character archetypes and models of mecha are available? Whether you pick a pre-made setting or build your own, all players should agree on which SRS to use before starting their mecha gen character generation. So SRS creation. This is where we're going to start. Mecha comes with 3 different SRSs you can use to begin play immediately, and more will be coming, blah, blah, blah. However, there are many, more settings and conflicts that can be found in mecha anime than we can ever put into words. We highly encourage fans of the game to create their own SRSs and provide the tools to do so. To create a setting, start by answering the following questions. This will give you a general idea of what happens in the setting, what the player should expect. So, looks like this is one type of SRS creation. Okay. All right. So here's something he says about his revised setting creation process after having gone through some revisions of the game. Before creating your own setting, there's one thing you must understand about mecha and any SRS you create for it. In mecha, setting is both really important and totally irrelevant. The me who wrote the SRS creation so long ago understood that at a fundamental level, but didn't articulate it very well. Why is setting in mecha irrelevant? Mechanically, setting makes no difference. In terms of the rules of the game, fighting in a swamp in power armor and fighting in space while piloting semi-organic mechanical wolves makes no difference. This isn't a game like, for instance, Burning Empires, where there's a world to burn and that world will affect available dice or anything like that. On the other hand, setting is irrevocably tied to the game because without an engrossing setting, there's no conflict, and without conflict, there's no reason to play. In other words, there's no reason to play mecha unless you are fighting for something. Believe me, counting exploding d6 dice pools isn't much fun unless there's something on the line. So, the problem with providing setting creation details. Because settings do lead to fun, there is a need for them. Still, because one setting feature over another doesn't lead to any tangible mechanical benefits, I don't see the need to have a strict set of rules for building them. Instead, the SRS creation rules that follow are really the best advice I can give on how to optimize the creative process. In doing so, I will document the process I've gone through to create SRSs and present it to potential SRS builders. The original post used an example put together by Wayne Humfleet and I to illustrate the process. You can look on the Mecha RPG blog and read the example. This essay also appears in Mecha Combiners, talking about the steps I went through to build out Ronin Fusion Superblade. In here, I'll talk about building Godblind. Again, I shall leave to you, O gentle reader, to see if this process is repeatable and makes sense. If not, let me know. Okay, so these rules will refer to the group. I believe SRS creation can be a lot of fun if done as a group activity. Still, if you are the reader looking to create a setting on your own, that's cool. You're just a group of one. So, yeah, normally I would absolutely do a group world creation, but I'm going to be very time constrained in running this short campaign. So I'm going to do solo world generation, and I know that kind of isn't ideal, but something that I will kind of roll with anyway. Certainly I'll be using probably pre-gen characters as well, so it's the room for player expression is going to be mostly after the game starts, not before. There's not really going to be a session 0. All right, so step 1, the idea, aka but, with, or meets. All right. Oh, I see. But with or meets. In the beginning, there is an idea. The best ideas for mecha SRS creation usually start off with a single sentence consisting of two hopefully unrelated ideas but joined together with the but with or meets in some similar phrase. So, for example, Big O meets Dark City. Mobile Suit Gundam but with a supernatural element. American Graffiti, but with mecha, and Chushin Gura in supernatural Japan, but with mecha. Okay. I have found that to make the SRS interesting and noteworthy, the theme should be a blend of at least 2 ideas. Just doing Big O isn't interesting by itself because it's already been done, which makes it a copyright violation, and Dark City isn't really a mecha setting. Only when 2 ideas are mixed together does the setting potentially become something worth considering further. There's a small part of me that wishes but with mecha wasn't the only interesting enough twist for some settings. I would prefer two unrelated things to come together with mecha lovingly spooned on top, like perhaps Kiss Saves the Universe meets X-Files. But with mecha or something... however, the existence of mecha in a time where there were not mecha or where common setting tropes don't allow for them is often interesting enough to move SRS creation to the next step, especially for those who think mecha are awesome, like me. So yeah, definitely myself included. Okay. So let's think about it. X meets Y or X but with Y? So let's get to designing. So first step. Step one. We are calling this, what is it? The idea. The idea. Okay, so let me talk about my general ideas here, and I will then come up with this like elevator pitch. So I'm thinking... So I was inspired by a few different properties. One of them is a very obscure Japanese mecha property called Maschinenkriege. So this is a like strange fictional setting that grew up out of model kit building. There is a story to it that's sort of released alongside photo essays that use mecha models, which have been like, you know, built out of plastic or resin and painted, and like photographs them and then uses that to like tell a story along with some text. And those have been released in like sort of like how to paint slash like kind of setting books. It's very, very, very strange. You know, if you've ever played Warhammer 40K and you look at a codex, and they have those photos in the middle of the book that show the miniatures on a field, and it has a little description underneath that says like, the Chaos Space Marines face off against the Imperial Guard. Think about those photos but blown up into a whole setting, a whole sort of like imagine that 40K lore books did not, or like codices did not have a whole bunch of fluff at the start. They just had those photos with little bits of text here and there. And you have kind of an idea of what Maschinenkriege is like. So, you know, just to give you a very brief sort of view of what these models look like. Take some of this over here. You can see this is like really kind of interesting, fairly primitive looking technology. Definitely inspired by like World War II / like Korean War military technology. And yet it still has like computers and mecha and space travel and stuff like that. So there's this weird kind of like retro aesthetic to it. You know, like these are the kind of power armor you see in the in these models. Yeah, so pretty interesting, honestly. So Maschinenkriege is definitely interesting, and has that retro aesthetic. Mostly in the case of Maschinenkriege, it's kind of, you know, focused on this like World War II aesthetic. But I want to use something instead that's more like 1970s military technology. So like Vietnam War era stuff. And that's going to be like definitely calling back to the tech designs in like Alien and Aliens. So yeah, there'll be computers, but like all the computer displays will be like CRTs. And we're not going to see a lot of the like, there's nothing like Crisis or you know, like Ghost Recon or any of the Future Wars sort of accoutrements you see in a lot of things like Titanfall or Call of Duty, the more modern games. So keeping things fairly low tech. Other ideas, other references are like Brigador, the kick-ass mecha video game, which is it's largely inspired by Machine and Kliga. So that is definitely a good reference to draw on. But all of these are just like aesthetic reference points. But I also really like this idea of the setting in Machine and Kliga being like Earth was basically reduced to nothing by World War. There was like a nuclear / biological war that wiped out everything. And then it was abandoned and people went to space, but then they came back and it was like everything had kind of regrown. That's super cool to me. So I really like this idea of Earth being recolonized and like being fairly lightly settled, but then there being sort of factions from space that have been drawn into a terrestrial conflict on Earth. And that is where the war is happening. So those are my background ideas, but now I need to move this into like a elevator pitch. And that's important for trying to get people to join this game as well, because as much as I have these ideas, they're not quite there yet. So, in something I can pitch, something I can, you know, say it's like this but that. Another reference I have in mind is Ring of Red, which is a like World War II era technology mecha game that is set in alternate history Japan, where the Soviet Union took over the northern half of the country, and it became divided in the same way that Korea did in the Korean War. So that is also a big reference for me. But what is the... So, okay, I think it's something like... I want to say something like maybe Jagged Alliance, but with retro mecha. That might be getting at something like what I'm looking for here. Yeah, cool. So I think that's a good start. Let's continue. All right, activity brain overwarp, step 2. So step 2 is really just brainstorming, but I wanted to give it a cheesy anime title. Actually, let's just call it brainstorming. If this step is being done in a group of 2 or more, the lines between GM and player should be pretty blurry right now. Everyone should be free to add details, suggest modifications, blah, blah, blah. Overall, brainstorming is the most fun part of setting creation, especially with a group. The idea here is to start asking a lot of what and how questions. What does it mean that there are cruel gods living in heaven? How does heaven affect people when it's only a few hundred feet above the living city? Why can't the god blind be targeted by the gods? What are those gods up to anyway? What do the mecha look like? Does everyone know they exist? How many are there? Wait, the gods have children? Of course, ideas don't always flow. If they're not, check with the group to be sure they really like the idea. If not, move on. Don't force an idea that no one likes in the group. Typically, that is the path to boring games. On the other hand, if a group likes the idea and needs a jump start, there are some charts to get the brainstorming going. Okay. So why don't we just like answer these things first, and then we'll get into the general brainstorming. So the first question, so step 2, brainstorming. Mecha type. So I think these are largely power armor. And if they're not power armor, they're largely like quadrupedal or sextupedal. Am I spelling that wrong? Okay. So it's power armor or quadrupedal, sextupedal. And hang on a second here. Just want to check chat. All right, cool. Yeah, so power armor, quadrupedal, sextupedal, and maybe there are some mecha that are like some amphibious, airborne mecha. And I think they're like fairly clunky. I think they're probably like powered by batteries. I imagine this is like a version of like 1970s technology where electric power was not, or like electric powered engines were not suppressed as they were by the auto industry in the mid-century, mid-20th century. And they've kind of outstripped internal combustion engines. I think that could be pretty interesting. And aside from that, I think they mostly use kinetic weapons. I think like laser weapons are like basically unknown. And like, yeah, jump jets are a thing. I think that's pretty sure. I like that idea. And like, the last thing I'll say is that, like, mecha do not overpower, do not, like, overpower other mechanized units on the battlefield. Like, they're a type of armored infantry, but, like, if a mech is going to take a hit from a tank cannon, like, they're done, right? Like, they're not Gundams, right? They're not Gundams. Okay, let's continue here. The availability of mecha. This is a very interesting point. How prevalent are they in the SRS? Could it be that only the players have mecha, or does everyone have one? Roll on this chart to decide. This is a really interesting question. I think that... So, I think going along with this idea of, like, 1970s technology, I want to think about what did the weapon systems of the 1970s represent, because those weapon systems began development like in the 50s or 60s, and I think they were kind of the combination of like Fordist industrial production. They were, I mean, in the first place, they were often weapons that were designed to be used by only like a semi-professional army. Like some conscription would be persistent. There was the notion still that the army would be a fairly large army, and that it would not be the kind of like ultra specialized small elite force that you see in like the modern U.S. Army. Even though the Pentagon is the largest institution in the world, the idea of how the U.S. Army is supposed to operate is built around this idea of like maintaining or like reducing casualties to the minimum and fielding a fairly small fighting force. And I don't think that was really how things worked exactly in the 1970s. You definitely see the development of sophisticated combined arms doctrines in the 1970s. So the combination of like air power and the use of combat helicopters, the use of air cavalry in general was like a 1960s innovation. And then the development of sort of like unorthodox or new combined arms doctrines with armored cavalry, as well as the air cav, right? So, like, I think that's one thing you definitely see in the 70s is the development of like very integrated and sort of multifaceted combined arms doctrines in the military, and how that like sort of mimicked the development of a more sophisticated capitalist economy. You also saw at the same time the growth of universities in U.S. society. And the growth of technical professions, and like the onboarding of this whole generation of baby boomers into the workforce and into the military, with a certain amount of technical training, and so it's really this kind of like transition period, right? where there's this combination of mass production with increasing technical sophistication. And yeah, and like sort of experimental doctrines with like how to use that increasing technical sophistication in ways that were not possible 20 years before, 20 or 30 years before. So that's kind of what I'm looking at in terms of what is the general background. This was also a period where the world system was not highly developed or integrated to the way, in the sense that it is today. If you look at contemporary arms manufacturers, they really, just like any other capitalist enterprise today, they really do operate in a kind of global supply chain. That was much less the case in the 1970s. Certainly there was a lot of standardization that was going on, but it hadn't really progressed to the point it has now. And there was still very much this like great power blocks with their internal arms manufacturers selling weapons to proxy states instead of having like a more open arms market like you see today. So that's all interesting. So I could see there being like multiple states and they have sort of separate arms manufacturing systems. That could be fun. That could be a thing that, I mean, that's something that you see a lot in like Front Mission, right? There is this real kind of like interest and like fetishization of national arms manufacturers and like a variety of arms manufacturers with like separate design doctrines. So again, that could be interesting. So availability of mecha. So the options here are only the PCs have mecha. Mecha are starting to be prevalent, or once were. The military government controls most mecha. The military government controls most mecha, but some private citizens have them. Everyone has mecha, but the PCs are more powerful, experimental. Or everyone has mecha, the PCs are no more powerful. I think I kind of want to go with option 2 here. Mecha are starting to be prevalent, or once were. That's the way that Machine and Krieger handles it. And yeah, I kind of like this like Front Mission alternative sort of vibe. Okay, so mecha availability. Like, we're talking about like mass mechanized armies, but the actual deployment of like the mecha as armored infantry or armored cavalry is kind of a new thing. So like the doctrines for how to use them haven't really been worked out yet. So this is mecha are starting to be prevalent, or once were. And yeah, mecha are starting to be prevalent is what's going on. So like mass mechanized armies just starting to roll out mecha. And like that isn't to say that it's impossible to get your hands on some if you are like a small state, or if you are a mercenary company. It's just that they're kind of like looked upon with suspicion by the like armories of the large states. And like, yeah, so like you know, pursuant to that, mecha can be purchased from arms manufacturers, but are untested and not trusted by national armories yet. So this is like kind of the position that air cavalry was in going into the Vietnam War. The factions. Okay, so roll 1d6 plus 1 to determine how many factions there are, then roll 66 for each faction. This will give you an overview of the faction that you can flesh out. So, I think one of the factions, so let's talk about factions. I think one of the factions is like a post-communist state. It's definitely like I mean, it's not post-communist in the sense that capitalism has taken over so much as like it's more like contemporary China or Vietnam, where there's a sort of ambiguity about the political ideology and the organization of the economy, where you have a rich owning class and social stratification, but the means of production are largely held publicly, and there's still sort of like a general commitment to socialist ideology, even if it is not really followed in practice. So I definitely want a faction like that. I think maybe they're maybe they like ooh, yeah, like what, like we'll just keep like drawing on this China idea here. So like they're on a different planet. Their faction's on a different planet, but they're looking for investment opportunities abroad, and they have set up an investment apparatus and like large infrastructure plans on Earth as part of their sort of like expansionism. So they are not like the core of their power is not on Earth, but they are a significant player because of all the money they have to throw around and their industrial might. So this is a cool idea. So let's say so we'll just, for now, we'll call them the post-communists. And they are, so they have large state industries, class stratification. They have, I think they're led by engineers. Engineer leadership. They are engaged in investment and infrastructure development on Earth, and they are based. Let's say they're based on where would be a cool place to have them? Maybe it's like not the asteroid belt, but maybe they're like based around Saturn. Like in the rings of Saturn. Could be. Think about that. So like there may be spacers. That could be interesting. So like, are they spacers? Which is to say, like, they grow up in space. They have sort of different physical characteristics because they grew up there. I think that their culture is probably like I want to say like something interesting. I think it's like a combination of like Scandinavian and Sikh cultures. Yeah, I don't think that they are like, you know, Chinese, right? The revolution that they had was far more recent than the Chinese Revolution. They've just gone through a similar sort of arc of development. Okay. So other factions. So those are off-world. They're off-world. I think there's probably also, let's go back to our book here. So this would be a government faction. Foreign government. I think there's probably a, so like this is for most purposes is going to be like a local conflict because this campaign is going to be a very short thing, so it's not going to be like all over the world or something. I think it'll just be like in one part of Earth. So I kind of imagine this place. I mean, imagine the game being set like in Northeast Asia. Maybe in like yeah, like around sort of like Manchuria, that kind of area. Northern China, Manchuria, North Korea, but like very different because the climate's changed and the vegetation has changed. The geography is still probably like the geology is still pretty much the same, but I think like the climate and everything's changed a lot, so it will be a different place. So let's take a look at let's take a look at a terrain map of the area. So like around this general area here. In the Yellow Sea. Yeah. So let's look here, like, geographically, where might we see a state develop? Like, maybe even just, like, this is like the Yalu River, right? Because this is like all prairie up here, right? But given a different geographical configuration, maybe something quite different. This is all steppe. Beijing's over there. Yeah. Interesting. So this is like at the end of her river. Oh, it kind of like barely flows down. To here. So where could we see? So I can imagine there's like two states focused in these two regions, right? Like where North Korea is now, focused around this river delta, these two river deltas. And then another state focused around this plain, with capital like where Panjin was or Shenyang. And then like maybe they're fighting over this peninsula here. That could be a place for conflict. I mean, I could also just set it in Japan because I know that a lot better. However, I mean, yeah, that could be interesting. So, like, yeah, but I don't know, it's kind of interesting to me. Like, the idea that there's, like, 3 states. There's, like, one centered around where Shenyang is now, one around Pyongyang, and another one around Vladivostok. And they're, like, these 3 states that are in conflict over this region. And it's, like, really hard to fight a war because this is such a mountainous terrain. But I think because of like global climate change in the wake of the catastrophe, like this is probably now a very fertile area. It's warmer. Like maybe this area up here is kind of like Kansai or Kanto. Very good for growing crops. And then maybe there's like a lot of like rainforests up here. And over here is like really like fertile prairie land. That could be interesting. So yeah, so I mean this is like somewhere worth living, you know? Instead of just being a place that is like only really habitable by large populations because of the use of heavy industry. Like this is actually like territory that is treasured by people. And yeah, and like so there's maybe like a city-state down where Dalian is. And these other mega states are sort of like fighting over their hinterland. That could be cool. All right. So those are all ideas. Okay, so factions. So we'll say there's like roughly 3 states in the area. There is one which is the one that is up by Vladivostok. I think they're probably very are they paranoid? Manipulative? I think they're a government. But as far as they're actually involved in this world, in this campaign, they may only represent as a military or an intelligence agency. Yeah. Like they're running covert ops in the area. Okay, so the state up by Vladivostok. State intelligence agency. So they are, in terms of their faction size, okay, so first of all, they are probably paranoid. They are, in terms of their faction size, like small, like maybe about 80 people are in the area operating. Faction resources, I think they are wealthy. They're like well supplied. And they are stealthy. So I think kind of thinking of like Barghest's operations in Alardesh in Front Mission 2, when Hector is leading the operation down there. Walter and Hector are in Alardesh, that one extra mission you see them in. So okay, so they're a player. They're around. They're not super interested. Like they're not directly involved in the conflict, but they are like monitoring what's going on. They have something at stake here. Okay, so the next state. Oops. The next state is the one around Pyongyang. So okay, so Pyongyang Pyongyang state. And then we have the Shenyang state. So I think they are, the Pyongyang state comes from this temperate rainforest area. They're probably like, I want to say they're like big into mining. So they have like major mining concerns. Forestry is a big thing they do. And they have like some river deltas that they can use too, right? Yeah, like pretty good river deltas, honestly. So I think they probably grow like, well, I don't know what the crops are yet. We're gonna decide like what is the wildlife that have survived the apocalypse. But I think they do definitely have like significant farming concerns. And it's like water intensive agriculture, right? And the thing they have to deal with their geography is that like I mean, they have to defend their coastline. Is a concern for them. They yeah, and I think it's probably like they have to worry about like pirates are a concern. And like, so probably their government is actually like inland because of that. It's not up over by the coast. And I mean, they're in a pretty good situation, honestly. It's just like, yeah, I think that's the main thing for them is they need sea access because otherwise they're pretty isolated. Yeah, so maintaining control over the Yellow Sea is like core for them. Key to exports. Okay. So as for their disposition, I think they're probably the aggressors. So they are aggressive. And their faction size is huge. They're a huge faction. Faction resources, again, they're pretty wealthy. But maybe it's like, okay, it's probably like this. They're wealthy, but beholden to the post-communists for infrastructure development. Something like that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the Shenyang state. So these folks, I mean, they have a lot of room. And I imagine maybe there's like... Oh yeah, that's the topography. Yeah, I imagine this is like a very like there's a lot of lakes in this land now. Because of the climate change. The rivers and lakes are more significant here. So it's kind of like you know, like the Canadian, like Manitoba, you know, lots of, like, tons of lakes everywhere. And then, like, the question as to, like, why wouldn't they... Like, I think there probably is some kind of faction over in the Beijing, Tianjin area. But, like... Maybe this area was nuked so badly in the catastrophe, because it was, like, a major capital area, that, like... most of this metroplex is like now just a bay. It's just like another part of the LOC because there's like the elevation and has been altered significantly just by the amount of nuclear explosives that were used there. Or yeah, like it's kind of like a dead zone still. Because of, like, some really gnarly shit that was used against this area. So they don't really have to worry too much about over here. They're mostly concerned about... yeah, like, I think probably, you know, as always... defending their northern borders against bandits, and they maybe like made a push to take control over Yellow Sea shipping, but then that was what provoked the war that they're in now. So what do they have? So they have many lakes. Like I think they have probably like large monocrop farming. They probably also have like major solar energy farms, because they just have so much flat land, you know. And probably like some like hydroelectricity in the east. And they're concerned with defending northern border against bandits. They're concerned with they tried to take control of Yellow Sea, but now on the defensive. I think they are, yeah, they're probably like divided now, because there's like a Hawk and a Dove faction, and the Hawks are like on the out, but then now they're in a war, so and again, they're a huge faction. They are also I don't think they're as wealthy. They're probably unevenly resourced. But one thing they do have is they have access to old PLA armories. Yeah, left over from before the apocalypse. That would be cool. All right, cool. So we have like three states involved here, two major combatants. Now let's talk about our let's talk about this like Dalian city-state. So, I mean, they're in the middle. They're like just literally caught in the middle of this conflict, and they probably have control over this peninsula. Which is called, let's look it up. Liaodong Peninsula, yeah. Yeah, so they, like, we'll call them, like, the Liaodong city-state. Liaodong Republic. I think they actually are, like, they're like a merchant republic. They control, they own most of the shipping in the Yellow Sea. the cities on the peninsula are like, I think they probably have like ruling families on the peninsula. Are like shareholders in the Republic, but like they don't have like you know, municipal governments tied to a national state up the peninsula. So this is like a loose control of peninsula. This is the faction that's going to hire the PCs. So like hires mercenaries. And they're in a really bad spot because they've been trying to prevent a war over the Yellow Sea for like the last like 50 years, and this is finally blown up. So like they don't want war. War is bad for business. And why have they been able to defend themselves and maintain their autonomy? I think that you know, they probably have a fortress at where would be a logical place here? Probably this river here. Zhuanghe River. So they have a fortress at the Zhuanghe River. Fortifications, at least. And also at like here on the Fudu River. They also have a probably like they have good shipyards. They have shipyards, which is what has helped them to maintain autonomy. Help build navies. Cool. All right. So that's that. And then one last, like, we're gonna have to give these names and like flesh this out a little bit more, but last but not least, we need to come up with a PC faction. So I think they're probably going to be a small mercenary army. So PC, small mercenary army. They are they off-worlders? I don't think so. I think they probably operate out of Kyushu. So they're based in Kyushu, in Japan. Or it was Japan. I don't think it's Japan anymore. Probably like... I mean, yeah, probably around Hakata, Fukuoka. Or Kagoshima. Maybe like Kirishima. I mean, it's such a famous place. I think it's worth using. Okay, so let's call them. What's a good name for mercenary company? We'll call them like the Kirishima Mobile Legion or something like that. The KML. They're based in Kyushu. They're a small mercenary army. Maybe like they have, how large would they be? They're a legion. I think maybe they have like it's probably a battalion-sized force. Yeah. So it contains probably about 3 companies worth of troops. Why not something like the Seeds of FF8, says Raven Black? As in, what, they have like a mobile base? So I think they're like battalion-sized. Sized, roughly like, they can field about so like I'll say there are roughly about 400, no, like 500 members. They can field a force of like 200, something like that. 2 to 300. And then yeah, the Kirishima Mobile Battalion. And I think they probably specialize in mech combat, right? So they like have a loose combination of semi-independent paramilitary army of sorts bound together by general code of conduct. I mean, yeah, like the question I have there though is like, how would they so I kind of like that idea of it being a kind of like egalitarian structure, like the squadron commanders don't necessarily follow a unified command, and like they kind of have like a code they live by. I kind of like that. So it's like, yeah, like so like the Kirishima Armed Brotherhood, Kirishima Armed, the Kirishima Mobile Company. Yeah, maybe that's good. And they're not a company in the sense of being this kind of company. They're actually, yeah, interesting. So, yeah, so the company commander, yeah, they're a company in the sense of, like, we're together. Maybe that's a little too confusing. So maybe they are, the Kirishima Marshall Compact. The KMC. So they're like battalion sized, but their company commanders are like fairly autonomous. They are affiliated by a charter. So like by a charter, company commanders are largely autonomous. They have some shared resources, base. They specialize in armored infantry tactics. And like I'll ask the players like if they have like a cool defining moment for the company or for the compact. Like when did they make their name? I'll leave that up to players to come up with something cool in their backstory, because like I don't need to come up with that. Yeah. Oh, and they're their crest, their emblem, is totally, their emblem is like a volcano with like with a gear or something around it, with a gear around it, because of like Sakurajima. Yeah. So that could be cool. All right, so I think we have enough factions now. Will the PCs be like founders of the KMC? No, I think the PCs will probably be like down at like the squadron level. So like one of them might be like a squadron commander. But like they're gonna be definitely below the company commander level. So like this platoon level here. So like think about like 8th MS team, right? Somewhat larger than that. But like they maybe have rivals in the other, like one of the other companies or something like that. Okay, so let's look back at the text. Just about gonna have to wrap it up here, but at least we have factions. That's good. Other things we need to talk about in the brainstorming. So what do the mecha look like? I think probably the PC. So the mecha, let's talk about that. So we talked about these power armor, that kind of thing. We talked about that mostly, so we don't need to get into that too much detail, but I do think there's like definitely like this kind of like Machine and Krieger style, like very like asymmetrical, bulbous, like lots of sort of like actuators and hydraulics, that kind of thing going on. Does everybody know mecha exist? Yes. How many are there? There's probably about, I don't know, in the world, maybe about like 5,000. Yeah, something like that. So I think like most of the enemy forces, so just talk about mecha, like most of the enemy forces are not going to be using a lot of mecha. It's probably going to be like the PCs are like fighting on the side of this republic, and their mercenaries have been brought in, and it's they're kind of like using this like somewhat like suspect cutting edge technology, and they're going to be fighting against like much more like traditional forces. So they specialize in armored infantry tactics. Like this is cutting edge. So that's going to be like an element of surprise for them. Should be pretty cool. Okay. So just like other random stuff to write down. So like other miscellaneous setting info. So we'll say like, so there has been a apocalyptic world war, an apocalyptic world war that wiped out life on Earth. There has been and brought major climate change. Earth has been resettled from the space colonies. There are many small colonist states. Mecha are unconventional, new technology, but still the product of mass industry. Maybe they're like, yeah, like it's probably that a lot of the mecha components are actually like repurposed from military technology off-world by like local like aftermarket manufacturers. So like mecha are constructed out of off-world weapon systems by Terran aftermarket manufacturers. So like a lot of the mecha are gonna like kind of have like space going technology built into them, but like that's not really necessary on Earth. It's just kind of vestigial. So there's like vestigial space combat technology built into mecha. And then technology is reminiscent of 1970s, so there's like lots. How is the state and level of technology for these off-worlders? Are mechas still unconventional new technology? Yeah, I think they are, because like it doesn't really make sense to use them in space. Like, I think probably like space going, I think, yeah, probably like the space going weaponry is designed for like, you know, yeah, I don't think there are Gundams. I think this is like, kind of like if you took like space pods or space fighters and repurpose them to be like power armor. Yeah. So there's no Gundams. Sad face. Well, you know, if we wanted to make a Gundam game, we could just make a Gundam game. But this is going to be something different. So yeah, there's like lots of CRTs. Communication is. Did the climate change necessitate the advancement of this power armor? could be, yeah, like I could see it, it developing as part of the recolonization effort. Like they had a very limited population, so they developed power armor in order to like improve their manual labor efforts. Oh, but you know what the thing is? It's probably the reason why they first developed the power armor is because everybody who was settling Earth were spacers, and so they were like very like they didn't grow up in like a 1G environment. They grew up in like a 0.2G environment or something like that. So they were really like feeble, and like their bone structure and stuff wasn't made to be living on Earth. So they developed this power armor to be able to do the manual labor necessary to colonize the planet. I think that could be pretty sweet. Yeah. So power armor developed originally for manual labor because of small colonist population and weaknesses of coming from a low G environment. So it's basically like a prosthesis, right? Like prosthetic technology. Yeah, communication is largely by radio. There is what else? Yeah, like there's no like stealth technology. I think I might have already said this. Yeah, battery powered. I think that oh, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's enough there. And like a lot of like brutalist architecture. Brutalist architecture. Cool. Yeah. All right. I like all that. That's all really cool. Cool. All right. Let's continue the checklist. Once brainstorming has died down, the group should have a pretty good idea of what the SRS will be about. Still, there are some things that are almost required in a mecha SRS. The GM should take a minute and run through the following checklist just to make sure everyone has agreed on all the critical SRS details. It is important that everyone involved in the SRS creation agree on these, since these decisions will form the background of the setting. Okay. All right. So let's just grab these and do this. Okay, so the time period, we'll say it's like the 23rd century or something like that. Overall technology, like 1970s. Yeah. The nature of mecha, they are mechanical power armor, kind of hacked together, mass produced. Availability of mecha, unusual but purchasable for a steep price. Number of mecha models, I think there's probably a lot. I think this is like, people think this is a growth industry, so there's like a proliferation of kind of, you know, fly-by-night manufacturers. So we'll say there's like probably about, on the market, maybe about like 20 models on the market. This is kind of like the early PC era where like any company would kind of just like get into the market and see if they could make something. The types of archetypes, I think these are the types of players. Maybe this is described up here. Your SRS will need at least one character archetype. Okay, so you can create your own by allocating 8 stat points amongst 4 stats and 3 bonus points. So I'll have to work on this later. Like to be decided later, basically. 2BD. History of the world. Earth was destroyed. Now recolonized. Who is trying to kill who? We will say it is the Pyongyang state versus Shenyang state. And we'll come up with names for those. Theme. The theme. What are the major messages? I think it's probably like about... I mean, I kind of want this to have like a... Like, I want it to be like gritty. I want it to be like... This business of war is largely unnecessary and not really glorious at all. So like I think the themes are going to be like like yeah, like FFT-esque, like in a sense. Like I'm thinking more like sort of like Front Mission 2, or kind of like original Front Mission. I think it's kind of like the draw of not really MGS. Like MGS is like very like spy thriller. I don't think it's quite that. I think it's like the draw of martial ingenuity versus the pointlessness, and like horrific violence of war. Which is like a very Gundam thing, but you know, I think this is kind of like, you have on the one hand like the joys of, yeah, totally. You have like the joys of this unit working together and like developing new tactics, and like, you know, they're doing this like really great stuff that they feel so like into, and like it binds them together as a group, but it's kind of like a meaningless activity, and yeah, and like I think probably be like room for like conflict with their superiors, and I don't know, it'll be interesting. So what are mooks? So I don't think, so I think the mooks, there's not going to be a lot of power armor, not much power armor, but everything else is on the table. Tanks, infantry, helicopters, probably like hover tanks, like hovercraft, that kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah, list of available damage types. Like, we're mainly going to focus on kinetic damage. Okay. So I think we're... Who's trying to kill who? I mean, I think the faction that the players are defending is very similar to Rabanastre. Rabanastre in FF12, or in a sense, like the like some of the factions like Genso Suikoden, minor factions, that kind of thing. So what is the clear conflict? Yeah, like, well, I think like I'll figure that out. I want to talk to the players about that. determine the damage types, disallow configurations, determine any special rules, offer to assign the task of creating models to the group, offer to assign creation of archetypes to the group, offer to assign non-mecha units, offer to assign NPCs. Okay. Well, I think this is going to be it for today, and like I'll be working on the rest of this stuff as we go down the line. But have some cool ideas. It's going to need to develop more, but it's a sketch, and I have a pretty clear sense of like what the theater of battle is going to be, and I can look up this geography some more, think about how it changed. Yeah, that's the one brainstorming thing I still want to do though is vegetation. What survived the apocalypse? That's important. I think there's like a lot of like really tall grass. There's probably like I think like rice has been like rice and barley have been like reintroduced to the planet, but they're not really native anymore. And I want to say there's like mutated monitor lizards. Oh yeah, like there's like the wildlife is gonna be really interesting. I think there's probably like giant flowers, like sunflowers. A lot of that. And like a lot of ooh. Are these the corpse flowers? Oh yeah, those things are so gross. I think some of those, like plants sort of like those. There's like a lot of those around. Yeah, or I think there's a lot of like mosses and lichen that have survived. And fungi. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so fauna, right? That's the flora. What's the fauna? I think like Like, yeah, there's probably like a lot of like large walking birds. There's probably like giant bees. And like yeah, like giant worms. Like not like dune sandworm worms, but like the size of like what's a good analogy? Like the size of pipes, you know? They like live in the prairies and just like aerate the soil. I think this is still a fairly temperate area, so we probably don't see that many lizards, but there's maybe like I imagine there's like a lot of like rodents that have survived. Yeah, like dog-sized rodents, you know? Yeah. So like the size of like a German Shepherd. Be cool. And yeah, but yeah, no, I think like there are like big lizards. Yeah, there's like big lizards in Japan, but not here. So like this would be like a thing that players would know about, but they're not around in like southern Japan. Cool. So those are some ideas, at least. Giant rats, yeah. Giant rats, like giant stoats, yeah, like giant ferrets. Giant tanukis. Man, giant raccoons would be scary as fuck. That's probably a thing. Nice. Okay, I think I'm gonna call it there. So thanks for hanging out, checking this out. Hopefully this will become a cool design as we progress here. And I will see you around with another stream soon.